Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be with you and upon you. Assalamu alaikum. Usually when the audience is very diverse, then I say if you don't understand any of the above languages, then hi. It gives me indeed a great pleasure to be here tonight with all of you, students of RPI. I congratulate the Muslim Student Association of RPI for, alhamdulillah, what they have been providing of opening bridges of communications between Muslim students and others, and exposing everybody to hopefully a proper understanding of what Islam is. I am indeed pleased to be part of that tonight, and I hope that what I will share with you tonight would be of some important intellectual and spiritual and practical benefit, God willing. Well, first of all, science and Islam, as our dear brother in the introduction mentioned, science and religion should be really integrated. And one of the most beautiful way I think we have expressed it here tonight is you have started this session with the prayer of the Salah. It just happened that 7:08 was the time of sunset, and Muslims do perform prayer after sunset as well as the fourth prayer of the day. And thus, though we are going to talk about something scientific, we were praying. For me, as a Muslim, the universe, all of it, as God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us, is in a state of prayerfulness, is in a state of celebration of the divine. God teaches in the Quran, وَإِن مِّن شَيْءٍ إِلَّا يُسَبِّحُ بِحَمْدِهِ. Everything in the universe celebrates the glory of God. We believe as Muslims that everything in the universe has, again, the word is just a word in four-dimensional context of language. Everything in the universe has sort of a consciousness. The human consciousness is different than the consciousness of a table, of a particle, of a flower, of a molecule of water. We believe that everything has a sort of consciousness. And of course, we're not saying that that's like human consciousness, but it's a consciousness that is elucidated, for example, in what I just mentioned, and there are many other verses in the Quran that teach us that everything is in tasbih of God, is in dhikr of God, is in sense, and has a spiritual awareness of God, and is actually glorifying God. And God tells us in the Quran, وَلَكِنْ لَا تَفْقَهُونَ تَسْبِحَهُمْ, but you do not perceive of, you do not conceive of, you do not comprehend the way they do that. And thus you find Muslim scholars of old, of the Middle Ages, the so-called Dark Ages. Well, Dark Ages is a relative term. It was Dark Ages in Europe, indeed, and in the West, but it was not Dark Ages in the Muslim world at that time. It was the time of illumination, and it is that civilization illuminated up to the Middle Ages and up to the 15th century, basically, that gave the baton to the Western civilization to take over and to continue. Muslim scholars of the time, Muslim scientists of the time, as they treated the issues of nature and as they discussed the laws of nature, whether in medicine, in chemistry, in biology, in physics, in optics, in astronomy, even like Ibn Khaldun of the 13th and 14th century, who Actually, many of you probably do not know that. I don't know whether anyone knows that, but I'm going to say next. Ibn Khaldun in the 14th century has actually talked about evolution and wrote a famous book in natural history in which he mentioned, in the context of prophethood, he talked about a concept of evolution at least 4 centuries before it was ever discussed in the West. And when he and others did that, they did that in the continuum of matter and spirit together. He did not separate between the spiritual and the material. He did that in a way which continued from the material to the spiritual, in a way that was very natural to him. There was no disassociation, there was no break between the material and the spiritual world. It was a continuum, and therefore the laws of nature as we study them are but a face of the same coin, namely when both faces of the coin are taken together, that gives us a better reality of what existence is, of what the world is. Later on, the likes of Albert Einstein, anybody doesn't know Albert Einstein? In his work, The Religious Spirit of Science, in 1934, he said, "You will hardly find one among the profounder sort of scientific minds without a religious feeling of his own. His religious feeling takes the form of a rapturous amazement at the harmony of natural law, which reveals an intelligence of such superiority that, compared with it, all the systematic thinking and acting of human beings is an utterly insignificant reflection. This feeling is the guiding principle of his life and work, insofar as he succeeds in keeping himself from the shackles of selfish desire." End of quote. Einstein, though a non-Muslim scientist, in the line of his predecessors, as he mentions, of greater and great profound thinkers before him and scientists before him, and of whom I am sure he meant also many great Muslim scientists and scholars, had dealt with the issue with a profound sense of spiritual awareness, in which I put it in the form of treating the world as a continuum between the rational and the supra-rational, between the material and the spiritual. There does not need to be a complete rupture between the two. They felt very comfortable. So what we were doing earlier, in my feeling as a Muslim, is simply also being in harmony with everything else in the universe. We were praying, we were celebrating God. We were actually recalling our inner spiritual consciousness of the world, as the world itself does at every moment and every instant. For everything in the world, in the universe, in space-time and beyond is in a state of, as I put it earlier, consciousness, awareness of the divine in ways we do not yet comprehend that, especially if we understand by scientific always something that has to be subjected to the laboratory experiments. In Islam, we talk about the unification principle. And in physics, we talk about what? Our PI students. And in physics, we talk about what? What's the latest thing in cosmology? What's the latest thing in science that scientists are running behind, and if they find that, they say, well, physics stop, science stop, after that are just commentaries. What is it?
Unified theory.
The unified theory. So in Islam we have Tawheed, right? Tawheed, we believe that God is one, His essence is one, His attributes are one, and therefore the creation must be one, and the laws that govern creation must be one. And in science, is it by coincidence? No. The greatest aim of science is to write an equation, one equation, the unified theory, through the unified theory, the unification theory. One equation that explains all the forces of nature. And they believe, scientists believe that it exists, and that's the way it must be. In Islam, we find it very interesting and very beautiful and very consistent with the Tawheed of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Concept of oneness, of affirming the oneness of God, the unification, therefore, of all the laws of nature through this concept. Like I mentioned earlier, that I am in dhikr, in prayer, unifies me with everything in the universe, because everything is in the universe is in form of prayerfulness or dhikr, as I am in ways I do not necessarily understand. In physics, you know the wave-matter duality, right? Every matter, like every electron, every proton, every quark, every particle is endowed with a dual nature. Namely what? Particle-like and wave-like. Particle-like and wave-like. Anybody studied the double slit experiment? Right? That's exactly what it is about. Then you have a beam of electron, and the electrons seem to have gone at the same time in both slits. One electron goes at the same time in both slits. And that's one of the ways that scientists have confirmed this concept of duality of matter. Material reality, material-like reality, and wave-like reality, which when you ponder from a religious point of view, for me as a Muslim, wow, that's very interesting. It's a sort of a plausible argument that the human being is not only material, is something else. It's spiritual as well, something like a wave-like concept. Only wave, no matter. And that's very interesting also to observe. Dunya and akhirah, this world and the world of the hereafter. We believe certainly, as Muslims and other religious people also do, not all, that there is this world and there is an afterworld, after this world, beyond this world. Well, it would be interesting, as many of you know, that when in science we speak nowadays in scientific terms through mathematical equations about higher dimensions, about hyperspace, right? About universes beyond this one that we conceive of, because the only universe we conceive of in space-time, in 4 dimensions, that is 3 of space and 1 of time, is ours. We don't conceive of something beyond 4-dimensional universe. What's a 5-dimensional universe? What's a 10th-dimensional universe? But they exist in science. And it takes a lot to venture into one. So far, we cannot. Because if we're to make a machine able to produce an energy to make a hole or a gate into space-time to go into another universe, scientists tell us that we need all the budgets of all the countries of the world, and we would not be able to build that machine yet. And it is interesting that there exists hyperspace, a world beyond. What is it exactly? Well, we are just beginning to know. I find it as a Muslim, scientifically speaking, and I'm a religious person by also training, and I came today wearing this just to make a point, number one, and number two, that there is a very easy, transition between this and that, or that and this. And there is no necessarily, again, this rupture between intellect and the spirit, or the spiritual. We show that in the way we live as well, and we should. So, what is hyperspace? What's the beyond? Here's a plausible argument for akhirah, for the world of the beyond. In science, we know that there are worlds of the beyond. And thus, again, this convergence between science and religion, at least as I view it and learn it and practice it as a Muslim, the concept of a wormhole or a gate into other universes from this universe, the Quran, God tells us in the Quran, وَلَوْ فَتَحْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ بَابًا مِنَ السَّمَاءِ فَظَلُّوا فِيهِ يَعْرُجُونَ لَقَالُوا إِنَّمَا سُكِّرَتْ أَبْصَارُنَا بَلْ نَحْنُ قَوْمٌ مَسْحُورُونَ. Which means if we were to open for them a gate, it just says that, Baban. If we were to open to them a gate into the heavens, i.e. into space-time, فَظَلُّوا فِيهِ يَعْرُجُونَ, and they remain therein traveling. I'm going to pause here for a moment. The word يَعْرُجُونَ, I translate it as a journeying or traveling into this beyond this gate that is open into space-time, into the heavens. The word is يَعْرُجُونَ. And يَعْرُجُونَ in the Arabic language actually means to move in curvature, in a curved trajectory. Did you hear that? And this text teaches if you were to open a gate into space-time for them, and they would be يَعْرُجُونَ, journeying, that I used here into English. In Arabic is يَعْرُجُونَ, and يَعْرُجُونَ actually is to travel in a curved trajectory. What does that remind you of? In physics, in relativity. Yes. Projectile motion, that's very good. That projectile motion is in this space, in 2 dimensions, and that we make it that way. But that's a curved motion, that's true. But something very interesting that I mentioned about opening a gate into the universe. Space-time, you learned in special relativity, those of you who did, is what? Curved. Curved. You can't imagine it. Mathematics, impose that, and that's one of the greatest discoveries of Einstein. Space-time is curved. In other words, actually, any object traveling in space-time is traveling in a curved trajectory. By the fact that we are in 4 dimensions and there exist stars and planets and gravitational fields, space-time is bent, is curved. So like you put an object in a bent plane, what will happen to it? It will move along the bent plane. It will not move linearly, but it will move in a curved space. So Allah in the Quran says, if we were to open to them a gate into the heavens, and they would be يَعْرُجُونَ. It described that journey as a curved, space-time, if you will. And this is miraculous, as far as we can tell, since this book was revealed 14 centuries ago. And the concept of angels, what are angels? Well, we can plausibly argue that angels are creatures living in hyperspace, right? In universes, in dimensions beyond ours. Ours is, as you know, 4, and so on. A miracle if I gave you a bottle like this, closed bottle, an empty closed bottle like this, and I tell you remove the water without opening the bottle, without cutting it, without doing anything to it that will spoil it. Can you do that? You cannot, of course. It's impossible in our three-dimensional universe with time 4. It's impossible. But scientists tell us, and this is science really. You could read something like this in one of the great works of a great scientist who simplifies a lot of science, Professor Michio Kaku of New York University, very famous physicist also. And his book is Hyperspace. And in that book, you know how you can do that? You take this bottle to a 4th dimension. How do you do that? That's a different issue. You take it to a 4th dimension or to a 5th dimension, and there you have more freedom of action. Because the higher dimensions, the more freedom of movement. For example, this is a plane. How many degrees of freedom do you have of motion in this plane? No, 3. 6, my God. 2. This is a plane, 2. X and Y. That's a plane. You have only 2 degrees of freedom. Then if you go to a sphere, then how many degrees of freedom do you have? 3, because you added height. By adding height, you have more degrees of freedom. And you can do in 3 dimensions that which you cannot do in 2 dimensions. Right? Imagine this. This is not my own invention. Reiterated in my own words. Imagine you are in a prison in 2 dimensions. And this 2-dimensional creature is in a prison. What's a prison in a 2-dimensional system? What is it? 2-dimensional creature doesn't have height. Just flat brain, flat body, flat everything, flat heart. So how do you jail them?
In a square plane.
That's right. Just draw a square. Or draw a circle. A closed line, closed curve, and then they're jailed. They can't get out. Suddenly, you come from 3 dimensions, and you do this. You go above the jail. And 3 dimensions do not exist in the 2-dimensional world. It's impossible. And then you do what? Just suddenly you land your finger there, and the 2-dimensional guard will see something from nowhere suddenly materializing. Of course, he's going to see 2-dimensional cross-section of your finger only, and then picks the prisoner, and the prisoner disappears suddenly, because now it's put into 3rd dimension. And of course, the guard will go berserk. He's going to go nuts. They will feel crazy. But they're going to take it to a flat hospital, 2-dimensional hospital, with flat doctors. In other words, my point is that when you go to a higher degree of dimensions, you have greater degrees of freedom of motion. And thus, the concept of miracles becomes something also scientifically plausible. It's a miracle because in the laws of physics as we know them, it's impossible. In the laws of physics as we know them, it's impossible. And thus, again, a convergence between religion and science. Time dilation and time contraction. You know, at least it seems to be not maybe everybody, but many of you would know that if an object is traveling at a speed that is very close to the speed of light, which is very, very difficult, but let's talk about small, very small particles, photons travel at the speed of light. Maybe neutrinos travel at greater speed of light. We don't know. There have been some scientific recent things and experiments that might come to the conclusion, as they have claimed, that neutrinos might travel at a speed greater than that of the speed of light. So when you travel at that speed, or rather close to the speed of light, what happens to time? Like it stands still. You don't age. Or if you are in a field of very, very strong gravitational pull, like a black hole or neutrinos or neutron star, what will happen? Again, time almost like stop still. If a person, assuming in this Gedanken experiment, in this thought experiment, a person would be traveling at that speed or in that field of gravitational pull, then he or she would see all his life or her life, all of it pass, and all the events pass like in a blink of an eye. That's amazing, isn't it? Why am I mentioning this? Again, from the religious point of view, an Islamic point of view, is that when we die, or when we are about to die at the moment of no return, something like that happens, we're told. The scroll of all your life passes in front of you, and you see yourself and your deeds and your words in front of you. 60 years, 100 years, 70 years, 90 years, the scroll, you read it at ease. Amazing. The Quran teaches us that certain things happen as they ascend to God, to the divine, in a day, the length of which is 1,000 years of what you count. To me, that's a very interesting concept, because it reminds me of the relativity of time. In other words, 1,000 years on Earth would equal, in some other frame of reference, only one day on Earth. Is that possible? Yes, of course. In physics and relativity, that's very possible. As a matter of fact, have you heard that a few years ago, a Muslim scientist discovered, through very simple equations, which I reviewed, I gave a lecture about this a few years ago, he computed in a very elegant, simple way, another way to, and he found another way to compute the speed of light on this basis. On the basis that that 1,000 years on Earth, and the day he picked that gave the right results is the sidereal day, the sidereal day and the sidereal month. The month has almost 28 days, that's sidereal month. And a day, the length of which is 1,000 years of what you count. So what is this distance traveled, which is equal to 1,000 years of traveling on Earth, or in our planetary system, and the reference taken was the moon, because when the Quran was revealed, it spoke to people whose calendar was lunar calendar. And therefore, the distance that an object like the moon would travel in 1,000 years at the speed that the moon does around the sun. Now, what speed would it be required to travel 1,000 years to be equal to 1 day here on Earth? And he found that speed to be exactly, extremely accurate relative to the latest computation of science, to be the speed of light. And thus, the speed of light had another definition, namely that the speed that is required to cross a distance of 1,000 years that would be traveled on Earth in one day at the speed of the moon's revolution around the sun. In other words, this person and other persons were inspired by, as religious people, as scientists, were inspired by something in the Quran. Again, bringing together this convergence between religion and science. Anybody knows what quantum physics is? A little bit? Okay. Anybody has heard the word quantum fluctuation? No? Okay. Scientists like Stephen Hawking, anybody heard about Stephen Hawking? Had postulated and argued that matter can be formed from nothing. Matter can be formed from nothing. It just takes a quantum fluctuation. And a quantum fluctuation, I think, in my opinion, is a very fancy word to say, really, we don't know how it happened. It was not, and suddenly it is. Because previously, by the concept of conservation of mass and energy, it's impossible that something can come from nothing. So sometimes some scientists had laughed at him when he presented his paper, but then he has become some of the greatest minds in science of all history. And that in the presence, or like in the horizon of a black hole, close to that point, a particle of matter and antimatter. Matter and antimatter. What's antimatter? It's a fancy word. Matter and antimatter. In matter, they pull together. In antimatter, they pull apart. For example, matter and antimatter, when they come together, they annihilate. Matter and antimatter together, the same mass and so on, equals zero. But they can coexist for a small amount of time. So at the event, at the periphery of a black hole, if matter and antimatter are such that, for example, the antimatter is, the antiparticle is inside, and the particle, matter particle, is outside. The one that is inside is pulled by the black hole, and there's radiation, black hole radiation of some kind, and then the other one is released free. So here is matter produced from nothing. Now, a quantum fluctuation to me, as a Muslim, is when God says, kun fayakun. God says, be, and it is. One way to look at that at the current state of our knowledge is a quantum fluctuation. Because science does not deal, so far as it is defined, science does not deal with why things are the way they are, but what our things are and how they might have come about. What's the cause? What's the observable cause? I should underline. Was the observable cause. But as to why and unobservable causes and prime causes, it seems that's not the realm of science as we have defined it. You know, the concept of singularities, singularity of black hole, singularity is a point at which all the laws of physics are broken, even before that. For example, at a singularity, this universe, before it came into being, as we know it, scientists tell us, it was what? A singularity. Singularity is a point so minuscule, which carried all the matter, M-A-T-T-E-R, matter, all the matter and energy that exists now in the universe, in an infinitesimally small point. Imagine, like 10 to the minus 45, it's not still a singularity, 10 to the minus 45 of a centimeter like 1 divided by 1 next to it, 45 zeros of a centimeter. This is a centimeter. And in that space, all matter and energy resided. In other words, a density like close to infinite. And where was that point, that singularity? It was in space, right? Test. RPI students? I'm going to talk about you to scientists. No, there was no space. We're going to talk about singularities. There was no space. Can you imagine that? No, you can't. There was no space. It was a point, not in space. And before that, you see the word before. Before is just English. It's human. It's four-dimensional terminology. Before time equal to 0. Before time t equals 0. Did you hear me? Before time t equals 0. I said before, and before is time, but there is no time before time equals 0. Imagine that. Science tells us that there was such a thing. And right after that, there was a singularity. All matter of the universe and energy was packed into this infinitesimal point. The laws of physics as we know them, they all break. To the extent that in order to continue more physics, they, like Steve Hawking, had to postulate some other time called imaginary time. Like an imaginary number, complex numbers, a plus jb. jb is the imaginary part. Time and imaginary time, it has to be postulated to continue the physics and to go beyond our experiences. I find that very, very interesting, to continue beyond the break point of the laws of science as we know it. And Steve Hawking says, if the laws of science broke down at the beginning of the universe, they would break down anywhere. End of quote. They would break down anywhere. I just want by this to tickle your minds and your spirits to the concept also of the beyond, to the extent that in my view, physics and mathematics are required to find new mathematics, new postulations to deal with that which is beyond, for instance. The Muslim early sociologist who wrote in what we might call in modern terminology nowadays in rational and in scientific terms about sociology and natural history, Ibn Khaldun, in the 14th century, he spoke of the continuum of matter through to spirit, and he spoke of evolution. It's incredible, but he spoke about it in the context of prophethood. I'm going to read, excuse me, from a translation of this great medieval work by Professor Rosenthal, translated the work of Ibn Khaldun, the Muqaddimah, like the introduction. Please allow me. This world, with all the created things in it, has a certain order and solid construction. It shows nexuses between causes and things caused, combinations of some parts of creation with others, combinations of some parts of creations with others, and transformations of some existent things into others, in a pattern that is both remarkable and endless, beginning with the world of the body and sensual perception, and therein first with the world of the visible elements, one notices how these elements are arranged gradually and continually in an ascending order from earth to water to air and to fire. Each one of the elements is prepared to be transformed into the next higher or lower one, and sometimes is transformed. The higher one is always finer than the one preceding it. Eventually, the world of the spheres is reached. They are finer than anything else. They are in layers which are interconnected in a shape which the senses are able to perceive only through the existence of motions. These motions provide some people with knowledge of the measurements and positions of the spheres, and also with knowledge, of the existence of the essences beyond, the influence of which is noticeable in the spheres through the fact that they have motion. Spheres, I mean not the sphere as a sphere, but the path of a planet around a star. Their orbits, basically, they mean by that mostly orbits. He says, one